Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fuban Forum. I'm Michael Rock, reporting to you from New York, from Brooklyn, New York. And I'm here with Brian Donnelly, also from Brooklyn, New York, in another part of Brooklyn. And tonight we're going to be talking about really the long trajectory of Brian's work for the first part, and the second part a little bit about looking forward into the future. And it's loosely organized around these two questions, which is first, what happened? And by that I mean what happened from when you first start making things to where you find yourself now. And then what's next, which is really a projection. And I've had the pleasure of working with Brian now for the last year or so on a few different shows, an exhibition in Hong Kong and one in Doha, and now on a book in Brooklyn. And it's been great getting to know him better and know his work. And Brian, I think it's kind of emblematic that I can't really remember when I first became aware of your work, but I know it kind of crept up on me. And to me, it's a little bit like the way you process a tag in graffiti. They're not there, and then suddenly they're there. But once you processed it and you've identified it, it becomes a system that produces a kind of private joy when you find it again, that you feel like you're part of something. For our audience in Taipei and Taiwan, Brian Donnelly is certainly not an anonymous figure, and though he goes by this name KAWS, and he needs little introduction because now he's one of the most recognizable artists working in the world today. Brian grew up in Jersey City, which is really a part of New York, just across the Hudson River from Manhattan, and he started skating and making graffiti before high school, which oftentimes brought him into the city and kind of be part of the culture of graffiti in the city. But he went on to study illustration at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and after a brief stint working in an animation studio, he went on to, say, quietly take over the art world. And I use that word quietly with intent because, at least from the outside, this iterative approach he has makes his work appear a kind of seamless. He moves from making paintings to toys to sneakers to album covers and interiors and massive sculptures in this graceful way that allows him to work through multiple ideas in multiple media and at multiple scales simultaneously. And that extreme blurring of the boundaries between so-called fine art and commercial art and collectibles and apparel and installations and social media often evokes this comparison with Andy Warhol. But I think Brian's work engages a very post-Warholian world where branding and copyrighted figures and licensing and franchising are really the reality of our time. So in these talks, as I mentioned before, for Fuban, we're looking at two things: what happened and what's next. So I guess to start off, we'll ask this fundamental question. It would be great to go back to some of your earliest work and talk about what you were thinking when you started, what you were trying to do, and where you saw it going.
When I started doing graffiti, it was just sort of I was always interested in art, and it was a way for me to kind of communicate with the kids, in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods. And it was kind of like a sport, or, just a way to get my work into the world. I really had no clue, coming from Jersey City, really what it was to be an artist. I just sort of knew that I liked painting and I liked the interaction with people. So graffiti just seemed like a logical step. At this point, this billboard's from 1995. So I'd have been doing billboards for a few years. And there was a certain point where I realized painting over billboards just seemed like, I was so much more attracted to it than just painting on walls, because it kind of set my work into a time frame and a period. And they were everywhere in Jersey. Jersey is full of highways and great billboard locations to paint on.
And it seemed that also that way of somehow taking over some other kind of work and making it your own, it's kind of the first step.
I mean, that's very much what graffiti is about. It's mostly about, taking over territory and, kind of putting your work into the most prominent spaces, the highest visibility. And I just realized the parallels between what I was interested in and what happens in advertising. And I just figured the advertisers had done all the research and found the best locations.
Right.
So, it's perfect to paint over them.
And were you thinking about yourself as a painter at that point, or, imagining yourself as a painter?
No, I always pictured that, the graffiti is something I loved, and I would have to kind of get a job to subsidize painting graffiti. I just thought, like, this is something I would do, and I'd have to do something else to support it or to continue it. I never, and in this point, this is also 95. I was not aware you can make a living as an artist.
Right.
Like, I really just wasn't. I didn't know any artist that was sustaining themselves,
I think one of the interesting things about the last picture and this one also is, sometimes when you start, you kind of start small and work bigger, but this is probably as big as your biggest painting now, right? Like, this is huge,
I'm very fortunate that I think all graffiti artists are, that they have this this sort of relationship to scale,
And also the urban, in the way that it really is so much part of the place. And, obviously the surface that you're painting on, but really injecting yourself into these different locations.
Yeah, this would be painted. I remember painting this. I got bit by so many mosquitoes that night. But, this was painted in really dark setting. I'm doing this at night, and there's sort of lights off in the distance, but it's pretty much a dark freight yard.
Right.
So you come back in the morning and you're like, oh, okay, those colors kind of work. but at night you really don't, know what's going on. You just try to use stuff that has enough contrast to see it. Yeah. So in 1996, I moved into Manhattan, and I was really interested in that point from doing the sort of more traditional graffiti over billboards. I was just interested in painting over advertising, and I got into breaking into phone booths and bus shelters, and so you see those little padlocks at the bottom. I had made keys for all the different avenues in the city, and this originally started. My friend Barry McGee gave me a key to the phone booths, and then I just became obsessed with breaking into things. I did a bunch in San Francisco with him. Went to Berlin, did billboards, Paris, did all those like newsstand kiosks. And this was all in the 90s. Mm. And it was great because there wasn't really like a frenzy of street art. It was just sort of, me putting my stuff out there, and it would sit on the street for weeks,
Right. I think it's so interesting because I feel like in this work already, kind of the groundwork for so many of your projects happened. And I have a sense of that you're always working on the same project over and over again, but you just kind of keep modifying it slightly. And then that's what gives your work such continuity somehow.
Yeah. I sort of see stuff almost as a family. When I create something, I'm very slow to it, and it enters in a very real way. And then I feel an obligation to it,
Right.
to continue it, to nurture it, to bring it into new iterations.
You start to kind of imagine a broader body of work for yourself, that goes beyond the sport of graffiti into something, like this is a lifetime career or something.
I think the transition from painting something like this into painting over the advertisements was the first time that I was making anything that was tangible and could be kept. Mm-hmm. All the walls and billboards, like I knew once I left that, it really wasn't mine anymore. But with the phone booths, I would paint them in my apartment and then go out and put some up, and then some I'd still have. And it felt like something different. I remember the first time people had inquired about buying them, I was always kind of wondering, like, why would you want this?
Right.
And probably from graffiti, you just sort of, you grow up thinking of how to create an identity around a name. Mm. So you want to be recognizable from, I want to be seen half a block away, right, and have what that says.
This is your first toy, right, in Japan?
Yeah, this is in 1999, so that's about 4 years after that billboard. When I really only made a toy because I had met some friends in Japan. This company called Hectic introduced me to Hikaru from Bounty Hunter. And I just saw toys as like a way to make sculpture. I wasn't really thinking like, oh, I want to be a toy designer or anything. And I thought I would approach this the way I approached advertisements, with taking something that's, you know, kind of you can reminisce about, or it's obvious in ways, and just sort of making it my own. And I thought this would be a one-time thing. I didn't think this would go into anything.
But I think, you know, when I was talking about that seamlessness in your work before, that move from 2 to 3 dimensions is not, you know, that's not a simple thing. And, but you have this, you know, kind of sculptural stuff in your work really early on. And, you know, you seem to make that transition really easily somehow.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this, I just see all the things that I've eventually changed. You know?
Right. Of course, this seems like really naive now, but
yeah, this seems very, very goofy. But it was for me, you know, you got to think, up until this point in my life, everything I was doing was 2D.
Right.
So seeing my work in, you know, sort of a sculptural form just opened up floodgates of like ideas that I wanted to do.
Like literally you have to have an idea about what the back of the head looks like, right? Which you never had to have before. So.
Yeah, exactly. Just what kind of, you know, how any other form. But once I saw, you know, I love to make and then react and make again. And
but I think, you know, one of the things that makes the work so familiar is that it's derivative, in the sense like you derive these different forms from things that are so familiar to us as cartoon characters. Like, I don't really know those feet, but I recognize those feet as a type, you know. So then we start to get into these really radical changes in scale, you know, because if you're dealing with toys, and then just for the audience in Taiwan, this is a famous parade in New York and Thanksgiving Day, which is sponsored by the department store Macy's, and it has these huge inflatable balloons. And what I think is so funny about this project is that the balloons are typically branded characters, Snoopy and Homer Simpson, and, you know, I don't, you know, Big Bird, or different
SpongeBob.
Like yeah, right. And since yours are a kind of comment on and derivation from those, it's so interesting to me that I assume they invited you to join this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I give them a lot of credit. It was a cold call.
Really?
And
that's amazing. Yeah.
I was talking to the woman that asked me to be in the parade, and I was really sort of in disbelief that they would give me that opportunity to sort of be in the lineup of everyone that I'm, you know, sort of referencing and almost poking fun at. Right. And on top of that, they let me do this pose, which is, you know, everyone else is very optimistic and mostly very colorful. And then suddenly you have this sort of sad, contemplative balloon flowing down the street.
Right.
And I mean, it was great that, you know, they asked me if I wanted to be on a float under it, and I said, no way. I just preferred, I took a press badge, and, you know, I took all the photos. I sort of ran around it.
Oh, I thought you'd be holding one of the strings.
Yeah. No. I was too, you know, I love taking photos. So yeah. I was running in front of it, behind it, all around.
And was this actually the first inflatable that you did? Because obviously that becomes a kind of important.
Yeah, this was. And, you know, before this, I almost thought of inflatables as cheating. You know, I was more interested in bronze or wood, or it just seemed, you know, I don't know, it just seemed too easy. But it made sense for this. And then when I actually did work in that medium, I realized the possibilities for it. And it really kind of opened me up to just realizing how you can kind of go in and seize a space and then, you know, shut down and move on. And
I mean, I think it's also, when we get to later looking at the AR, it's so interesting the way that, in a way, you've recreated that digitally. The image we see here, you kind of create now as a virtual version of that.
Yeah, you know, I'd always loved that sculpt, and I never really knew how to make it as an object. You know, I didn't want it to just sit on the floor. I didn't want it to be something you had to hang with string.
Right.
So it wasn't for, years to kind of finally have a solution.
Yeah. So, I think that also brings up this, if there's already a fluidity between making product and making art, there's also this idea of, making art about things which are products, or, painting things which are licensed, or, it's always somehow walking that line in terms of like what you're trying to paint or what you're trying to depict. But how did these paintings come about?
Well, after doing before the package painting, I never really worked on canvas. I didn't really gravitate towards it. I was just painting over the phone booths and bus shelters. And then once I did the package paintings, that made me want to do some larger paintings. I grew up on the Smurfs, and I just love that aesthetic. And it just felt like these are paintings that needed to be made.
If we look then, into, this is a set for the MTV Music Awards, right? Or
yeah,
Music Video
Awards. So this
Awards.
was after working on the Macy's parade. This was like soon after it, I think the next year, or maybe even the same year. And one of the challenges of doing the set for MTV was, how do you install in a stadium in a day? So originally I was commissioned to do the trophy for it. And then once I had that sculpt, they asked me if I wanted to design the whole stadium. And so this big thing that you're seeing that's 60 feet tall was inflatable. And all the coloring was printed in black, white, and grays to look like metal. So that was really, it was, I don't know, on camera, it's amazing. Like, and throughout the show, it looks like this giant steel thing.
Right. Again, not only are you going to 3D, but now really looking at this massive scale, but this really heavy materiality too, because you start to work in wood and in cast metals and in enameled metals and things like that. And so that really must tax a whole different aspect of your appreciation for surface and for craft, but also working with these like large scale manufacturers to make these things happen, right?
Honestly, working with the foundries with these large scale pieces is very similar to working with the toy factory and what they do.
Oh, and, interesting.
From the beginning, I was always interested in the surface of the paint, and, whether a part would be glossy or matte, and what kind of matte, can we make it feel velvety? And now working in, things like wood, this originally started because I did a small wooden toy. And I just loved the relationship you had to it. It was like a warmth that didn't exist in my work before.
Right.
And, you're so accustomed to having toys when you're little, like these wooden objects, that it's nice to change the scale and shift the dynamic between the viewer and the object. Also just making the most of opportunities. This was a project with Kim Jones for Dior when he first started working for them.
And this is really recent. This is last year, right?
This was in 19, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess was that last year? God, it feels like a lifetime ago.
I know, seriously. Because I think it was when we did the show in Hong Kong, and it was right after that. Yeah.
No, this was great. I mean, this looks like a very simple project, but the engineering of this piece and the steel structure that went under it, and getting all the permits to get it through Victoria Harbor. There's different permits for different parts of the harbor. And, I work a lot with this team called All Rights Reserved, and my friend SK, who I started working with 10 years ago. And it's just, it just is important, I think, when you find relationships of how to work together with people, that you keep those, if there's somebody in your life that you work well with, you try to just build on that. So, through that trust, you can get to a point of doing large projects like this. I feel like we do these things no problem now.
But it seems like each one is a kind of bigger feat than the last somehow. And is that part of it?
That's just because we're, trying to keep it fun.
Yeah, right. But is that part of it to really like push yourself to do something that hasn't been done before, that is beyond what you thought you could do?
Pretty much. I think that for us, for myself, I want to see where it can go. I want to do something. It's like the same thing when you're little and you like jump over a gap, and then the next thing you want to do is jump over a bigger one.
Right.
Um,
Which is part of the impulse of graffiti too, isn't it? You know, like.
It is kind of.
Yeah.
But you know, these are works that I really try to respond to the landscape, and you can't, you know, if this was 10 feet, it would feel like nothing.
But I think one of the remarkable things is that, you know, by staying so closely to this character and, I don't know, companion you've had for like 20 years now or something, right? So, you know,
yeah,
because the character stays the same, you really focus on the scale, the materiality, the pose, like how you know, what you do to it each time, because you don't have to reinvent the character. So we really focus on what happens to it. So you really see a kind of growth and continuity to you as an artist because the object stays the same.
Yeah, I mean, I treat it as a family member.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and so I want to talk a little bit about this new project of yours, because, you know, I think that you find yourself now in this position of, you know, obviously you have amazing reputation, your work is all over the world, you're working on all these different scales, projects, museum shows all at the same time. But at the same point, you know, pushing yourself in this very personal way to do work which is different or try something new. And this new project, maybe you could talk a little bit about how it came about and what it actually is, because I think when people see it, they don't really know what it is.
So yeah, I guess I want to say a year or two ago, I started sort of exploring augmented reality. You know, I met this company called Acute Art, and what they were doing was amazing. And I was always a little skeptical of sort of, you know, virtual reality or just I just felt like I would never want to make something that wasn't true to the work that I made. And through trying different things, I realized, wow, we can actually make really convincing pieces that can exist in an environment in the same way that anything, you know, that I physically make can. So, you know, we started to just explore it, and this was the first piece. And for the first thing, I wanted to make something that couldn't be bronze, you know? So that's why I went back to the original sort of floating companion.
But I think it brings together so many different interesting things, because obviously all you have to have is the app, and then you can have a KAWS work, right? Like it allows you.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you can walk around it in your own space and really get an understanding of what my work looks like. I mean,
but also to me, it ties back to all of that early work of, you know, kind of surreptitiously injecting yourself into the cityscape. You know, you could do that by painting on billboards, but now you do this in this really digital way where you can kind of like stick your work anywhere you want, and it really becomes part of the city. Like, this is so convincing as an image, as probably more convincing than the you know, the parade where you see all the strings that hold it together, because it's kind of the perfect model of that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were to go there with your phone right now, it would be there.
Right.
So,
and so do people leave them in the environment and you'd find them again?
Well, we planted a few of them around, like in front of the Louvre and Times Square and different locations in the beginning. But the ones that you can use through your app, you know, they're just up for, you place them and you could look at them and you could take photos and share them. But when you turn the app off, it disappears.
It goes away again, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to replace it when you open. But the one thing about it now is that we're working with, you know, several artists that are all in the app. And you can place multiple artists' works together in a space. So you can almost create these group shows just when you show up.
So a kind of curatorial act too.
Exactly, and it's no different than like the way you place, you know, different things around you in your own space.
So it seems like it has this, you know, this kind of remarkable flexibility to it, you know, because again, if you think about scale, materiality, and temporality, it has components of all those things, right? It's there and then it's not there. It can be huge, it can be tiny, you know, like we have but it somehow also has that strange materiality that you are able to achieve, you know, in powder coating or something like that. Like, so making the surface must have been a huge.
Yeah, it was really important to me to sort of stick to the same feeling as the sculptures.
Right.
You know, I wanted to be no less, you know, than any of the other works. And actually the amount of work that goes into the AR pieces is probably very equal to what a real sculpture takes.
Right. In terms of casting or something like that, probably the man hours is probably very similar.
Yeah, exactly. The sort of engineering of it.
So, you know, where do you go from here in terms of, like, you know, covering all these things? Obviously, you know, you go to your studio every day and just make stuff, right? And that's where it leads you. But what are you imagining next?
You know, I never really had a plan. And I don't, you know, I still don't at this point. I try to just sort of wake up and get into what my interests are. And, you know, there's moments where I feel super creative and I have tons of things I want to get done. And there's other moments where I want to look at books. You know, I just want to go look at other art. And, you know, I feel super fortunate to have the opportunities that I have. And, you know, I try to think about what I'm going to put into the world and not want to invite somebody out to see something I'm not 100% on.
It seems like also so many things that instigated your work also came from, you know, collaborations or people coming to you or people, you know, wanting you to do something with them. And that really sort of creates a direction for your work too, right?
I've always loved collaboration. I mean, that was, you know, from painting together on walls to meeting friends who had companies, whether it's skate companies or fashion companies, or it kind of gives you real insight into how other people operate. And I think there's a lot to learn and take away when you get that kind of intimate look in. It also sort of a way of marking a moment, you know, it's a lot of, when I think about things I was doing in the 90s and early 2000s, it was with the people I was meeting at that time. And, you know, and sort of then you have these sort of objects that could kind of point you back to that time when you see them.
Right. I really want to thank you so much for taking the time late at night here in Brooklyn.
Cool.
And
Thank you.
yeah, and I think that look forward to your next project.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we'll be working together on it.